On a quiet spring day in 1988, a horrifying scene unfolded on Charlotte Street in Kansas City's Hyde Park. A 22-year-old man named Christopher Bryson leapt from the second-story window of 4315 Charlotte Street, naked except for a dog collar around his neck. Despite a broken foot, he ran down the street screaming for help until a stunned neighbor called 911. When police entered the home Bryson escaped from, they uncovered a real-life house of horrors. In an upstairs bedroom, they found ropes and an electrical transformer wired to a bed, along with syringes, drugs, and torture devices strewn about. Investigators also seized a detailed torture diary kept by the home's owner. That owner was Robert Andrew Bob Berdella Jr., a 39-year-old local businessman who, until that moment, had appeared to be an ordinary, even helpful member of the community. But his descent into madness is not as simple as you think. Robert Berdella was born on January 31, 1949, in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. He was the first of two sons in a strict Catholic family. As a child, Robert was a loner with few friends. He suffered from poor vision, needing thick glasses from age 5, and a speech impediment, which made him a target for bullies. His father, Robert Sr., was a staunch Catholic and a sporty, macho man who often expressed disappointment in Robert's shy and unathletic nature. Robert Sr. did not hesitate to discipline with force. He would beat Robert with a leather strap for perceived failings. Feeling estranged from both peers and his father, young Robert grew up isolated, focusing on solitary hobbies like painting, collecting coins and stamps, and writing to pen pals overseas. In his early teens, Robert realized that he was gay, a fact he kept secret due to the conservative milieu of the 1960s. Despite this internal discovery giving him a bit of private confidence, outwardly he remained socially awkward. A pivotal moment came at Christmas 1965. The Berdella family was visiting relatives when Robert's father suddenly died of a heart attack at age 39. This loss devastated 16-year-old Robert. He briefly turned to the church for solace, but eventually became cynical about religion's comfort. Within a year or two, Robert's mother remarried, which Robert saw as a betrayal to his father's memory. He grew even more withdrawn, retreating deeply into his private interests. Around that same time, Robert watched the 1965 film The Collector, which left a lasting imprint on his psyche. The movie's plot, a man abducting a young woman and holding her captive in his basement until she dies, both fascinated and disturbed him. Berdella would later cite The Collector as an inspiration for his own crimes. He also became fixated on artifacts and primitive art during his teens. He collected exotic stamps and photos from his pen pals, sparking an interest in cultural curios that foreshadowed the antiques business he would one day run. By the time he graduated high school in 1967, Berdella was an intelligent young man with dark fantasies and a chip on his shoulder, feeling like an outsider in the world. After high school, Berdella moved to Kansas City, Missouri, to attend the Kansas City Art Institute in 1967. Initially, he was an eager and talented art student. However, in his second year, he underwent a drastic change. He fell in with a crowd that introduced him to drugs and the anti-authority counterculture of the late 1960s. Berdella began abusing drugs and even started dealing them on campus for extra cash. He also started showing a cruel streak. In one notorious incident, he tortured and decapitated a live duck in front of classmates as part of a misguided performance art project, horrifying those around him. On another occasion, he experimented by tranquilizing a dog, purely to satisfy his morbid curiosity. These acts of animal cruelty were early red flags of the sadism to come. Unsurprisingly, Berdella's behavior drew negative attention from KCAI administrators. In late 1969, after receiving a harsh criticism for the duck incident, he voluntarily withdrew from the Art Institute without completing his degree. Around the same time, he had his first brushes with the law. At age 19, he was arrested for attempting to sell methamphetamine to an undercover cop. He managed to avoid prison, pleading guilty and getting a 5-year suspended sentence. But a month later, he was arrested again with marijuana and LSD, though those charges were dropped. By 1970, Berdella was a college dropout with a budding criminal record, a taste for drugs, and an alarming penchant for violence. Rather than return to Ohio, he chose to remain in Kansas City and start anew on his own terms. In 1969, Berdella moved into an old house at 4315 Charlotte Street in Kansas City's Hyde Park district. He would live at this address for the next 2 decades. By this time, Berdella was openly gay, and he began to associate frequently with society's outsiders, male sex workers, drug addicts, and runaways who roamed the Midtown area. Berdella often befriended these young men. He presented himself as a sympathetic figure trying to help them get off drugs or escape street life, sometimes offering them a place to stay. To neighbors, he even said he felt like a foster parent to these wayward youths. However, Berdella's benevolence had a darker side. He expected favors in return. Some of these men became sexual partners, willingly or under the influence of drugs he provided, and he exerted control by loaning them money or letting them live rent-free so they would be indebted to him. This dynamic of luring vulnerable young men into dependence was a prelude to the deadly domination he would later inflict on his victims. Outwardly, Bob Berdella was regarded as an eccentric but civic-minded neighbor. His property was a bit ramshackle, but he was very active in the local community. In the late 1970s, he helped form a neighborhood crime watch and became the chairman of the South Hyde Park Neighborhood Association in the early 1980s. He volunteered at charity events and even represented the neighborhood on local TV fundraisers. Meanwhile, Berdella had cultivated a respectable career as a chef. By the mid-1970s, he was working as a senior cook at several upscale Kansas City restaurants. At the same time, he devoted more attention to his true passion, collecting antiques and oddities. By 1981, he had established national and international contacts for acquiring artifacts and viewed this as his full-time business, eventually quitting the culinary field to focus on his antiques trade. In 1982, Berdella opened a booth at the Westport Flea Market, which he grandiosely named Bob's Bazaar Bizarre. There, he sold jewelry, art, and curios from around the world. The income was inconsistent. Sometimes he turned a good profit, other times he resorted to stealing or scavenging items to resell. He also continued to take in roommates or lodgers at his Charlotte Street home for extra income or ulterior motives. Through the flea market, Berdella befriended a vendor named Paul Howell, whose teenage son Jerry Howell often visited. Jerry and his friends initially teased and taunted Berdella for his flamboyant homosexuality, but Berdella remained friendly. According to Berdella, Jerry even confided that he and some friends occasionally earned money as male prostitutes. By the summer of 1984, 19-year-old Jerry Howell had known Bob for years as an eccentric, helpful older friend. Tragically, Jerry would soon become Berdella's first known murder victim. On July 5, 1984, Berdella offered Jerry Howell a ride from Kansas City to attend a dance contest in nearby Merriam, Kansas. Jerry accepted the favor. He would never return home. According to Berdella's later confession, during the drive he plied Jerry with alcohol spiked with sedatives, including diazepam and acipromazine, to render him helpless. Once Jerry was barely conscious, Berdella brought him back to the house on Charlotte Street, instead of to the contest. He tied the teenager to a bed and gagged him, beginning a horrific cycle of abuse. Over approximately 28 hours, Berdella repeatedly raped, tortured, and drugged Jerry Howell in that upstairs bedroom. He ignored the young man's desperate pleas to be let go, or answered them with threats and taunts. The torture was brutal. Berdella sodomized Jerry with foreign objects and administered electrical shocks. At one point, Jerry vomited from the stress and drugs, but being gagged, he couldn't clear his airway. Sometime on July 6, 1984, Jerry Howell died, either from choking on his vomit or from the combination of the gag and sedatives making it impossible for him to breathe. With his victim now lifeless, Berdella set about disposing of the body. He dragged Jerry's corpse to the basement. There, he suspended the body upside down over a large cooking pot and made incisions to drain the blood from the corpse, leaving it to hang overnight. The next day, once the body was largely bloodless, Berdella methodically dismembered Jerry using a chainsaw and knives. He wrapped the body parts in newspaper and stuffed them into multiple trash bags. Those bags were put out on the curb for the garbage truck to haul away to the landfill. In this manner, Berdella literally made Jerry disappear. When Jerry Howell was reported missing, police questioned Berdella, knowing he was the last to see Jerry. Berdella claimed he had indeed driven Jerry to Merriam and dropped him off near the dance contest, and that was the last he saw him. With no evidence to contradict him at the time, investigators had to let the matter lie. Unbeknownst to them, Berdella had kept detailed logs of the entire ordeal in a notebook, documenting each act of torture. He also took Polaroid photographs of Jerry, both during the abuse and after Jerry's death, as gruesome trophies. The first murder had given Berdella a taste of the power and satisfaction he craved. He would soon seek that feeling again, with an even more reckless cruelty. In April 1985, Berdella's next victim emerged. Robert Sheldon was a 20-year-old acquaintance who had previously stayed at Berdella's house as a lodger. On April 10, 1985, Sheldon showed up at Charlotte Street, asking if he could crash for a short time. Berdella agreed, but quickly decided to make Sheldon his prisoner. He later said he found Sheldon an inconvenience and saw an opportunity to vent some anger on him. 2 days later, on April 12th, Berdella drugged Sheldon into unconsciousness and tied him to a bed in an upstairs room. Over the next 3 days, Sheldon endured atrocious torture. Berdella swabbed drain cleaner in Sheldon's left eye, causing intense burning and damage, and inserted needles beneath his fingernails. He wrapped piano wire tightly around Sheldon's wrists to permanently damage the nerves, effectively rendering his hands useless. 3 days into this torment, a workman was scheduled to come to Berdella's house to do some roofing repairs. Not wanting his captive to be discovered, Berdella decided to kill Sheldon on April 15th. He suffocated Sheldon by placing a plastic bag over his head and binding it with a rope, causing him to asphyxiate. Berdella then moved the body to a third-floor bathroom, where he dismembered Sheldon's remains in the bathtub. He kept Robert Sheldon's skull as a macabre trophy, later storing it in an upstairs closet while disposing of the rest of the remains in garbage bags. Then, in June 1985, a chance encounter brought Berdella his third victim. Mark Wallace was a 27-year-old drifter whom Berdella barely knew. He had once helped with some yard work. During a severe thunderstorm on June 22, 1985, Wallace was caught outside and took shelter in Berdella's tool shed. Finding him there, Berdella invited Wallace inside the house. Noticing Wallace was anxious, Berdella offered to inject him with a tranquilizer to calm him down, a solution Wallace willingly accepted. Once Wallace was sedated, Berdella carried him upstairs and bound him to a bed. Wallace was subjected to uniquely cruel electrical torture. Berdella clamped alligator clips to Wallace's nipples and repeatedly shocked him with electricity, using the pain to jolt Wallace back to consciousness whenever he began to black out. He also began experimenting by stabbing hypodermic needles into muscles on Wallace's back. After roughly 24 hours of continuous abuse, Wallace died on June 23, 1985, from a combination of the drugs, the gag, and lack of oxygen. As usual, Berdella dismembered the body and discarded the parts in the trash. Wallace's disappearance wasn't noted at the time. It was only after Berdella's arrest that a tip led police to identify Wallace from the torture photos. Just a few months later, in September 1985, Berdella committed what he considered his first planned torture killing. James Ferris, 25, was a casual friend who reached out to Berdella for a place to stay. Berdella agreed, but with the premeditated intent on making Ferris his next victim. On the evening of September 26, 1985, after meeting Ferris at a bar, Berdella brought him home. He drugged Ferris's dinner to knock him out, then tied him to the bed. Ferris's ordeal was the most brutal yet, lasting approximately 27 hours. Berdella used an electrical transformer to administer repeated 7,700-volt shocks to Ferris, clamping electrodes to his shoulders and testicles, causing excruciating pain and convulsions. He also punctured Ferris's neck and genitals with hypodermic needles as another form of agony. Berdella logged each development in his notes. He wrote that Ferris eventually became delirious from the pain and drugs. One entry reads, "Unable to sit up more than 10 to 15 sec," indicating Ferris's growing weakness. The final entries were "very delayed breathing," followed by the notation 86, restaurant slang for "throw it out," which Berdella later admitted meant Ferris was dead and the project was finished. After killing Ferris, Berdella once again disposed of the body in pieces. Ferris's wife, who had reported him missing, later recognized her husband in some of Berdella's Polaroids after the case broke. By the end of 1985, Robert Berdella had murdered 4 men in 18 months. With each crime, he grew more confident and more sadistic. He had learned how to keep his victims alive longer to prolong their suffering, and how to dispose of bodies so thoroughly that no evidence surfaced. He also saw that police, lacking evidence, could not touch him. Even though investigators did suspect Berdella in the disappearances of Jerry Howell and James Ferris early on. Emboldened, Berdella continued his murderous trajectory. In 1986 and 1987, he would claim 2 more victims, holding them captive even longer and escalating the torture to ghastly heights. In June 1986, Berdella encountered Todd Stoops, a 23-year-old whom he knew well. Stoops and his wife had twice stayed with Berdella as temporary lodgers in 1984 when they needed a place, doing chores to pay rent. After 1984, they lost touch. On June 17, 1986, Berdella happened to run into Todd Stoops at a park and invited him over for lunch, with the intention of drugging and imprisoning him. Berdella later admitted he was sexually attracted to Stoops and wanted to make him a compliant sex slave. Once Stoops was inside the house, Berdella knocked him out and bound him. For the next 2 weeks, Stoops was kept chained up like an animal, enduring a nightmare of torture and rape. Berdella aimed to break Stoops's will entirely. He focused on destroying Stoops's ability to see or speak. He delivered electrical shocks to Todd's closed eyes in an attempt to blind him, and injected drain cleaner into his throat to severely damage his vocal cords and stifle any screams. As the days passed, Stoops was repeatedly beaten, shocked, and violated. Towards the end of the second week, Berdella committed an especially barbaric act. He ruptured Todd Stoops's anal wall during a particularly violent sexual assault. The injury caused a horrific infection that began to poison Stoops's body. By the final days of June, Stoops was gravely ill. He could not keep food down and was so weak he could barely breathe in sitting position. On July 1st, 1986, after roughly 2 weeks of unrelenting abuse, Todd Stoops died from septic shock, brought on by his infected injuries. As usual, Berdella dismembered the body and disposed of it. A forensic pathologist later confirmed that the infection from the ruptured anal wall was the cause of Stoops' death. Berdella's sixth and final murder victim was someone he initially considered a friend. In the spring of 1987, 20-year-old Larry Pearson met Berdella while browsing his booth at the flea market. They bonded over a shared interest in the occult and odd artifacts, which led Berdella to offer Pearson temporary lodging at his house. Pearson moved in and even did chores to help pay his way. Berdella later claimed he hadn't originally planned to harm Pearson until Pearson made an offhand remark that sealed his fate. On the afternoon of June 23, 1987, Berdella and Pearson were watching the horror film Creepshow 2 together, and then went for a drive. During the drive, Pearson jokingly bragged that as a teenager, he had robbed gay men in his hometown of Wichita, a disclosure that enraged Berdella. That very night, Berdella decided to incapacitate Pearson and make him his next captive. He got Pearson drunk, and once Pearson was intoxicated, injected him with chlorpromazine, a heavy tranquilizer, to knock him out. Berdella dragged the unconscious young man down to the basement and tied his hands above his head to a support column. He immediately injected drain cleaner into Pearson's throat to destroy his voice, just as he had done with Stoops. What followed was a staggering 6 weeks of captivity, the longest Berdella ever kept someone alive. During this period of late June through early August 1987, Pearson was subjected to countless tortures. But Berdella also used a new tactic: coercive trust. After days of torment, including routine electrical shocks and the breaking of bones in Pearson's hands with an iron bar to subdue him, Berdella noticed Pearson was willing to do anything to avoid further pain. Pearson would beg for mercy and follow orders. Sensing this, Berdella decided to reward Pearson by moving him from the dank basement to a second-floor bedroom after about 5 days. He told Pearson that if he continued to cooperate, the torture would lessen. Desperate to survive, Pearson played along. He even trained himself to sleep without moving, so he wouldn't inadvertently provoke Berdella and invite punishment. For several weeks, Pearson endured daily sexual assault and frequent torture sessions, such as high-voltage shocks. Berdella noted that Pearson was by far the most compliant victim he had ever had. But on August 5, 1987, after 6 horrific weeks, Larry Pearson's endurance ran out. In a final act of defiance, Pearson bit deeply into Berdella's penis during a rape, screaming that he couldn't take any more abuse. Enraged, Berdella bludgeoned Pearson with a tree limb until he was unconscious, then finished him off by suffocating him with a plastic bag and rope. The Kansas City butcher had claimed his 6th victim. After killing Pearson, Berdella went to the emergency room to get his wound treated, lying that he'd been bitten during consensual sex by a Larry person. Pearson's body was dismembered in the basement, like all the others. He kept Pearson's severed head, storing it in a freezer for a time before eventually burying it in the backyard. By early 1988, Robert Berdella had murdered 6 men in total secrecy. He had refined a modus operandi of targeting vulnerable young men, incapacitating them with drugs, then subjecting them to prolonged, sadistic torture before ultimately killing them. He took careful steps to dispose of the remains and even kept souvenirs like skulls, teeth, and countless photographs to relive his achievements. Local police did suspect Berdella in at least 2 of those disappearances, but without evidence they could not prevent the carnage. It seemed Berdella might never be caught until his 7th intended victim fought back. In April 1988, a man would do what no other had: escape from Bob Berdella's torture den and live to tell the world. In March 1988, 22-year-old Christopher Bryson had the misfortune of crossing paths with Berdella. Bryson was a sex worker whom Berdella solicited on March 29, 1988. Offering payment for sex, Berdella lured Bryson to his house, a trap Bryson walked into unknowingly. Once inside, Bryson was struck on the head with an iron bar and knocked unconscious. He awoke sometime later, naked and bound to Berdella's bed, with his hands tied and his eyes swabbed with ammonia that caused a burning blindness. Over the next several days, Bryson was repeatedly raped, beaten with a metal bar, and tortured in many of the same ways as Berdella's previous victims. His voice was disabled by drain cleaner injections to the throat, and he was shocked with electrical devices. Bryson quickly realized that if he didn't feign cooperation, he would likely be killed. Berdella told him flatly that he'd had others get this far before, and they're dead now because of mistakes they made. It was a clear warning that Bryson's only chance of survival was to not repeat those mistakes, likely meaning attempting to escape or anger him. Bryson played the role of the submissive captive. He ingratiated himself to Berdella, agreeing with him and not fighting back. By the third day of Bryson's captivity, Berdella had grown a bit more confident that Bryson was broken. Bryson managed to persuade Berdella to loosen his restraints slightly, instead of being continually tied hand and foot to the bed. Bryson convinced Berdella to tie his hands in front of him at times, complaining that his circulation was cut off when bound overhead. He also got Berdella to leave a television on in the room when he left the house, even gaining access to the TV remote, which Berdella placed between Bryson's bound hands so he could entertain himself. These small concessions would prove crucial. In a careless oversight, Berdella accidentally left a book of matches in the bedroom within Bryson's reach. In the early morning hours of April 2, 1988, Bryson's fourth day in hell, an opportunity to escape finally presented itself. Berdella had left Bryson alone, tied with his hands in front and one foot loosely bound to the bed. Seizing the moment, Bryson grabbed the matches Berdella had left behind and used them to burn through the rope binding his hands. It was a slow, painful process as he singed his skin in the process, but eventually the ropes weakened and Bryson broke free. He knew he had to move quickly and quietly. He crept to the second-floor window, still stark naked except for the dog collar around his neck, and jumped from the window before Berdella could return. He hit the ground hard, breaking a bone in his foot, but adrenaline fueled him. Bryson got up and ran down the street wearing nothing but the padlocked collar, desperately seeking for help. A few hundred feet away, Bryson encountered a man who was a meter reader for the utility company. The astonished worker saw a naked young man, bleeding and distraught, with a dog collar and chain hanging from his neck, frantically pleading for help. Bryson shouted that he had been held captive and tortured and begged the man to call the police. The meter reader immediately led Bryson to a nearby house, whose residents quickly phoned 911. When officers arrived minutes later, they were shocked at the sight before them. Christopher Bryson was injured, red swollen eyes from chemical burns, visible scars, and rope marks on his limbs. He could barely talk, as his throat was raw from injections, but he managed to tell them that he had been held hostage for days by a man named Bob Berdella at 4315 Charlotte Street. Bryson warned them that Berdella had shown him Polaroid photos of other men who appeared dead and had threatened that Bryson would end up the same way if he didn't obey. It was clear to police they potentially had a serial killer on their hands. An ambulance rushed Bryson to the hospital, while patrol officers raced to Charlotte Street to secure the scene. At Berdella's property, officers found him initially reluctant to cooperate. He refused to let them in without a warrant, but Bryson's statement gave ample cause, and within hours, a search warrant was obtained. On April 2, 1988, police entered the house at 4315 Charlotte Street and promptly arrested Robet Berdella on charges of sexual assault and kidnapping. As they began to search the premises, would confirm Bryson's story in every horrific detail and reveal crimes far beyond what anyone had imagined. With Berdella in custody, detectives methodically searched his home and property. The evidence they uncovered was overwhelming. In the second-floor bedroom, where Bryson had been held, police found the charred ropes still tied to the bedposts, the ones Bryson burned through to escape. They also found an electrical transformer plugged into the wall, with wires leading to the bed, just as Bryson described. Nearby was a metal tray stocked with syringes, small bottles of drugs, swabs, and eye drops, a ready-made toolkit for inflicting pain. Also in the room were an iron pipe, blood-stained ropes, and leather belts that had clearly been used as restraints. Tellingly, the wooden posts of the bed were deeply gouged and worn, consistent with someone struggling violently against bonds over a long period. As investigators widened their search through the house, they began finding grisly physical evidence of murder. In an upstairs closet, they discovered a human skull inside a bag.
Berdella was found guilty of murdering several young boys and burying them in his backyard.
In the backyard, buried in a shallow hole, they unearthed a human head in an advanced state of decomposition. Elsewhere in the house, they found human bones. Several vertebrae with saw marks were hidden in a hallway, and a couple of human teeth were tucked inside envelopes. Down in the basement, investigators recovered tools that were clearly used to dismember bodies: a hacksaw, a miter saw, and a chainsaw that was literally stained with blood, flesh, and pubic hair. Luminol testing of the basement floor and 2 plastic trash barrels revealed extensive blood traces, illuminating the scenes of Berdella's butchery. Perhaps the most damning evidence of all were the things that documented Berdella's crimes. Police seized a total of 334 Polaroid photographs and 34 snapshot prints from the house. Many of these images showed men during captivity, bound, gagged, enduring torture. Others depicted what appeared to be corpses in various stages of dismemberment. In some photos, investigators could even see part of the photographer's body, like a hand or stomach, indicating the images were taken by Berdella himself. On top of a dresser, they found Berdella's handwritten torture logs, meticulous notes detailing each victim's ordeal, with timestamps and abbreviations for different forms of abuse. The level of planning and record-keeping was chilling. Additional personal effects linked Berdella to specific missing persons. In one closet, officers found a wallet and driver's license belonging to James Ferris, who had vanished in 1985. They also found a news clipping about Jerry Howell's disappearance, carefully saved among Berdella's papers. It was now undeniable that the long unsolved cases of young men who'd gone missing in Kansas City were connected, and the man responsible was Robert Berdella. The Kansas City Police Department quickly formed a special task force of 11 detectives and a sergeant to handle the Berdella investigation exclusively. As they dug into Berdella's background, they discovered that within certain circles, especially among transient hustlers, Bob Berdella's house had been regarded with fear for years. Rumors abounded on the streets that if you went home with Bob, you might not come back. Some male prostitutes had even warned others to stay away from him due to his penchant for drugging and torturing partners. Police realized that they had interviewed Berdella about Jerry Howell in 1984 and about James Ferris in 1985, but he'd lawyered up, and no evidence had tied him to those cases at the time. Now, all the evidence was literally in their hands. Investigators began working to identify all the victims in the Polaroids and logs. They found many names scrawled into Berdella's notebooks. One lead was a young man named Freddie Kellogg, who had been a frequent lodger at Berdella's house in the early 1980s. When brought in for questioning, Kellogg provided valuable insight. He stated that Berdella had a habit of injecting his house guests with drugs and sexually assaulting them while they were incapacitated, regardless of consent. Kellogg said that in order to live at Berdella's rent-free, one had to bring around other young men that Berdella found attractive, essentially luring potential victims for him. Importantly, Kellogg was able to identify 3 of the young men in the Polaroids by name: Todd Stoops, Robert Sheldon, and Larry Pearson. This helped police match names to several sets of remains in missing persons reports. By late April 1988, forensic analysis confirmed whose remains had been found. The skull in the closet was identified via dental x-rays as Robert Sheldon's, and the head in the backyard was matched to dental records of Larry Pearson. With these identifications, prosecutors moved rapidly. On July 22, 1988, a grand jury indicted Berdella for the first-degree murder of Larry Pearson. Soon after, additional murder charges for the other victims followed. Rather than fight the charges in court, Robert Berdella chose to cooperate and avoid the death penalty by striking a plea deal. In August 1988, as murder indictments mounted, Berdella agreed to plead guilty and divulge everything about his crimes in exchange for prosecutors not seeking capital punishment. On August 24, 1988, he formally pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Larry Pearson in Jackson County Circuit Court. The plea surprised many, even the judge, but prosecutors accepted it. In open court, Berdella admitted under oath that he deliberately killed Pearson by suffocating him with a plastic bag and rope, with malice aforethought. Judge Alvin C. Randall then sentenced Berdella to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Pearson's murder. That same day, Berdella also pleaded guilty to forcible sodomy and felonious restraint charges related to Christopher Bryson's ordeal, and as part of the deal, additional assault and sodomy charges were dropped. For Bryson's case, Berdella received a second life sentence and a 7-year sentence to be served concurrently. Finally, on December 19, 1988, Robert Berdella pleaded guilty to the remaining 5 murders. In this final plea, he was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder and 4 counts of second-degree murder. Judge Robert Myers imposed 5 additional life sentences and stipulated that the first-degree murder sentence carried no possibility of parole. As part of the plea bargain, Berdella had agreed to give a full confession to his crimes, in exhaustive detail. In mid-December 1988, over a series of interviews spanning 3 days, Berdella described every murder to detectives and prosecutors. These confessions were recorded and would later be used to verify evidence and provide closure to the victims' families. Robert Berdella's confessions revealed a mind consumed by sadistic fantasies and devoid of remorse. He calmly recounted how, after killing his first victim in 1984, his thoughts returned to the movie The Collector, which became a major inspiration for his subsequent crimes. He admitted that once he had a victim bound and under his control, any empathy he might have had disappeared. The person became an object in his eyes. Berdella never planned beyond the moment. He said he didn't even consider what would happen if one of his captives escaped, because he never truly believed they would. He walked detectives through the abbreviations in his torture logs. CP meant chlorpromazine injections he used as sedatives. DC stood for drain cleaner, either swabbed into the eyes or injected into vocal cords. EK indicated the use of electric shocks on his victims. Every code corresponded to some cruel procedure he had developed. Berdella frankly described how he took measures to keep his victims alive and conscious as long as possible. For instance, he would administer antibiotics if a captive's injuries or infections threatened to kill them too quickly, because he wanted to extend the torture for as long as he could. He also fed them, just enough to prevent them from starving, if he intended to hold them for days on end. Berdella confirmed to investigators what they suspected about the fates of his victims' bodies. He disposed of all 6 bodies in garbage bags, which were hauled off to unknown landfill sites. None of the remains, aside from the fragments recovered at his house, were ever located. Essentially, the bodies of his victims were lost in the trash forever. He alternately buried and exhumed some remains. For example, he dug up Robert Sheldon's skull after it had decomposed, cleaned it, and kept it in an upstairs closet he called his gallery. He removed the teeth from Sheldon's skull and stored them in envelopes as keepsakes. However, Berdella vehemently denied the more sensational rumors that had circulated in the press. He insisted he never engaged in cannibalism, voodoo, or satanic rituals, nor did he sell human remains from his shop. Those lurid ideas were pure fiction. His motives, he stated plainly, were sexual sadism and the thrill of control, nothing more. Even after confessing, Berdella remained notably unrepentant. He portrayed himself as a victim of circumstance in some ways. In interviews from prison, he tried to restore his self-image as a sensitive citizen who had simply made mistakes, blaming the media for demonizing him. He also suggested that police incompetence after his first murder allowed him to continue, a way of deflecting some blame onto authorities.
The police knew what was going on, so it's no big deal.
And that accounts for your remark to me, and I don't mean at all to make light of it, that I killed 6, but they, the police, by allowing this to stay open, they killed more.
Yes, this has been something that's been going on for over 20 years, to my knowledge. Maybe not caught me. Scared me off, maybe. Prevented things from happening after how? Definitely.
What he did not do was express genuine regret. In fact, in one interview, Berdella dismissively referred to his victims as play toys, underscoring that he never saw them as human beings, but as things for his gratification. On October 8, 1992, Robert Berdella died of a heart attack at the Missouri State Penitentiary at age 43. Upon hearing of his death, Judge Randall sarcastically remarked, "Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy." Berdella's sudden demise came just 4 years into his life sentences. While some of the victims' families felt he'd escaped full justice by dying relatively early, others took the grim satisfaction in knowing he met a presumably painful end. In November 1988, authorities held auctions to liquidate his assets. Furniture, artwork, and personal items from his home and from Bob's Bazaar Bizarre were sold to the public, with proceeds used to pay legal fees. Bidders from across the country called in, driven by morbid curiosity. By the end of the first day of auctions, around $60,000 had been raised. For the community, however, no amount of money could alleviate the shock and disgust. In December 1988, a local businessman purchased Berdella's infamous house on Charlotte Street and promptly had the house demolished. Neighbors who had once participated in block parties with Bob Berdella and never suspected a thing watched the House of Horrors reduced to rubble. "We never picked up on anything. We feel used, as though we were part of Bob's cover," said one neighbor, expressing the sense of betrayal felt on the block. The lot where the house stood became a vacant patch of grass, an empty, silent space where unspeakable evil had occurred. Even decades later, the case of Robert Berdella remains one of the most disturbing in American crime history. True crime enthusiasts and criminologists have studied his behaviors as an extreme example of sexual sadism. His crimes have been recounted in books, a 2004 documentary called Bazaar Bizarre that featured an interview with Berdella, and a low-budget 2009 film. The name Kansas City Butcher is now etched alongside other notorious serial killer monikers. The Berdella case also served as a wake-up call regarding missing persons. Many of his victims were transient or estranged from family, and their disappearances didn't initially draw major attention. Police procedures in tracking missing adults, especially from at-risk groups, saw increased scrutiny in the aftermath. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Fridays with Tony. If you like this kind of true crime story, let me know in the comments below, and subscribe so you can see more stories like this. Also, check out the videos we've already posted. Hope to see you back. I'll see you next time for another story that may be unusual, unsettling, or unsolved. That's all for today.